So if you managed to watch my talk last week, if you managed to remember it or have even seen it at all, you'll know that I was talking about the presence of God. But at the end I talked about how he's teaching me through my making of sourdough that this is a time where God is moulding us. And I wanted to talk a bit more about that this morning and talk a bit about our foundations, or another word would be rhythms. What are the things that are put into us that are in our daily lives that mean that as we go forward they're going to mould and change who we are. Now this idea reminds me of a video about time management that I'm sure many of you guys will have seen, but if you haven't seen it or if it's been a long time since you have, we're going to show that video now. Just bear in mind I'm showing you not necessarily the best version of this video, but one that was about 40 seconds long, so the best for this situation. But anyway, roll the video. The premise is simple, right? You've got a jar, which is in essence the time that we have in our lives, and we have the sand, which is just the stuff, the everyday as it were, and then you have these marbles, which is more essential things: cooking, cleaning, homework, etc. Stuff that has to be done. And finally she had the big rocks, the foundations of our lives. Now she defined these as things like God, family, work, friends, another stone that we didn't see, maybe it was something dodgy she was trying to hide. But the nature of humanity and human life is that we try and fit those foundation things on top of all the other stuff, on top of the things that are just stuff in life, as well as the essentials, and we just can't fit it all in. And so in the video it's easy, right? You just throw all the stuff out the jar and put the foundations in the bottom and fit everything back on top of it. Easy. Except it's not easy, is it? It's not easy, because how often do you actually get an empty jar? How often do you just get to get rid of most of the things or all the things that clutter up your life? Well, perhaps the current situation we're in might be one of those times. Pete Greig at Spring Harvest reminded us that the Chinese word for crisis is a mixture of two Chinese words. One is danger and one is opportunity. And whilst it is for certain a dangerous time, it's a time which is not nice. There's lots of horrible stuff going on, but perhaps it also is an opportunity to reset, for you guys to reflect on what are your foundations, what are the things that you've built your life on, what are the things that happen week to week, day to day, that are the foundations of your life. And therefore, what are the new rhythms going to be? What are the things you're going to make time for in your life that sustain who you are beyond this period? Perhaps it's not just about what are the foundations that we're lacking, but what are some of the things that we have as foundations in our life that God's asking us to reflect on and change? What are some of the things that we need to take out and substitute new things for, or change how we do certain things in the future? Cold brew coffee. See, I've begun to learn this lesson myself too. This is Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Now you might recognise his face from my bookshelf. He's sort of right behind me when we're having meetings or whatever. Now for those of you who don't know who he is, let me talk to you about him. I won't talk for too long because I could talk forever about this guy. Now Bonhoeffer was a German guy, born in 1906, and though he was born into a family of scientists, he decided that he wanted to study theology, the why questions of God. And it turned out that he was an incredible student, an incredible academic. At 21 years of age, he'd already achieved his master's degree. 24, achieving not just his PhD, but receiving an award called Habitation. It basically means that a university is saying that your work is of such quality that we are offering you a job for life and we're never going to sack you. That's how good he was. He then travelled extensively, went to loads of different places before eventually becoming an ordained minister in the Lutheran Church in Germany. And then Hitler came to power. And as some of you may know, he began to change the church in Germany. He began to use them to get his own ideas across. He formed something called the Reich Church, which was meant to form sort of German nationalism with the church itself so that the people would trust him more. But Bonhoeffer spoke out against this. In fact, he spoke out against it so strongly that he was banned from teaching in Germany and was banned, in fact, from even entering the city because he was seen as such a dangerous voice. He ended up doing some quite incredible things. He joined one of the German intelligence services to work as a double agent to help Jews escape from the country. He also created an underground church called the Confessing Church, which went against the teachings of the Reich Church, and they taught the gospel instead of this strange version of Nazi-formed theology. He also, with his brother-in-law, kept a book in which they recorded all of the atrocities that they heard about the Nazis perpetrating against people. And the idea was that after the war was over, they would use this book to hold to account the people that were doing some of these terrible, terrible things. Sadly, however, Bonhoeffer was arrested for his outspoken stance against Nazism, and then in April 1945 the Nazis discovered not only these books that he'd kept about the atrocities that they had committed, but they also discovered he'd been part of a plot to kill Hitler. And so Hitler himself signed an execution order just a few days before the Russian army liberated the concentration camp that he was in. Bonhoeffer was executed. Now, Bonhoeffer was just 39 years old when he died, but by this point he'd already achieved and done incredible amount of things. He'd written extensively as well. In fact, he'd written this book, one of the most important books to come out of the 20th century, The Cost of Discipleship. And for the last 6 years, in fact, I've had a picture of Bonhoeffer at my desk at work. And it's to remind me that he had so much more to give and so much more to offer the kingdom of God. And it makes me ask myself, what can I do with my time to continue furthering and extending the kingdom of God? But I think God's teaching me a huge lesson about this. And in fact, the first thing that I do when I go back into my office is I'm going to take that picture and I'm going to get rid of it. See, I've made working hard, or working harder than I should have, one of the foundations in my life. And actually what it's done sometimes, I think, if I'm honest, is it's made less room for the more important things in my life. For family, for friends. It's made them hard to fit in. And as well as that, actually, it's not even a good or a right foundation in the first place. I think even Bonhoeffer would be disappointed by it. Not only that, but I think God would be asking me the question, not focusing on what Bonhoeffer did, but who he was. It's not about what Eddie does, but it's about who he is and how am I formed. You see, another book that Bonhoeffer wrote was this one, Life Together, and it was written all about his experience of running effectively an illegal Bible college. So as we said, the church had been taken over by the Nazis and Bonhoeffer had set up this underground church called the Confessing Church. But to have a church, you do have to have people in it that can do things. So Bonhoeffer used to take a group of young men and he would teach them how to be leaders. Now they would go and borrow someone's house to hide away, but they would live life together for a few months. And they would study and they would train to become ministers in the Confessing Church. But more than that, their aim was to be formed by God. And so this book has got deep, rich reflections on their rhythm of life. The rhythms of silence and solitude, of worship and prayer, of service, of meditation on scriptures, of studying the scriptures, of praying together, of being together, of serving each other. It talks about how every day they woke up early and prayed because they wanted the first thing that they did to be speaking to God. And they did the same at night. The last thing they did of the day was to speak to God, to worship him. And so God became the beginning and the end of every day of their lives. And so it was those rhythms that were Bonhoeffer's focus. Those rhythms because they were forming who he was. His focus wasn't the stuff that he was doing. The stuff came out of who he was as a person, who God was forming him into. He first knew that he had to simply know God and live in the rhythms that he'd given him. And I'm having to learn to not put overwork in, simply to find my value or to please God or to please others as one of my foundations. But instead I've got to learn what it means to put rhythms in place in my life to simply be with God and therefore work out of that rhythm. So these are the lessons that I'm learning. But what about you? Have you made the pursuit of money one of the foundations in your life that stops you from spending time with your family? Have you made academic quality one of the pursuits of your life ahead of godly character? Do you find that there's just not enough time in your day because of all the little things that build up for you to add on to it, family time, or add on to it 5 minutes to spend in prayer with God? For one of the first times really in our lifetime, we've got an opportunity where the jar for many people seems to have been mostly emptied. There is room to rebuild and rethink these foundations. So Paul says in the book of Romans chapter 12, do not conform to the ways of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And so I wonder, how is God asking you to transform your mind? What are the pathways that need to shift to create new rhythms? And so whether we're in our groups or whether you're at home watching this, perhaps you're one of our parents or someone connected to our community, I want to ask you 3 questions. The first is this: what are the foundations in your life? The second, what is God calling you to have as new foundations? And the third is, how do we do it? How do we change? And so if you're coming into our youth group this morning, that's what we're going to discuss. And if you're not, then I encourage you to just sit with a pen and paper, ask yourself those 3 questions and pray and say to God, what are these foundations that I need in my life? Or what are the foundations that I need to change to live a full and sustained, transformed life in you, God?